In the Middle Ages, death was everywhere, yet it was poorly understood. People feared dying, but they feared something else almost as much, being buried before death truly arrived. This fear was not irrational. It was based on real events, real records, and real human suffering. This is the true historical story of a woman who was buried alive in medieval Europe, reconstructed from documented cases, burial practices, and medical ignorance of the time. The woman's name was Agnes. She lived in the late 14th century in a small European town surrounded by forests and fields. Her life was ordinary, quiet, and fragile. She was the daughter of a farmer, married young, and spent her days doing the same repetitive tasks as countless women before her. Washing clothes in cold water, preparing simple meals, tending animals, and praying that illness would not visit her household. Illness was the greatest enemy of medieval life. There were no hospitals as we understand them today, no antibiotics, no clear medical knowledge. Fevers could last for days. People could slip into states of deep unconsciousness that mimic death. Breathing could become so shallow that it was invisible to the eye. A pulse could disappear beneath cold fingers and fear. One winter evening, Agnes collapsed. It began with a fever. Her skin burned. Her thoughts became confused, and her body weakened rapidly. By nightfall, she could no longer stand. Her husband and family placed her in bed, wrapped in blankets, and prayed. They watched as her chest barely moved. Hours passed. Agnes did not speak. Her eyes remained closed. Her lips turned pale. By morning, her body felt cold. A local priest was summoned, as was customary. There were no physicians available, and even if there were, their abilities were limited. The priest checked for signs of life in the simplest ways known at the time. He placed a hand near her mouth to feel for breath. He pressed her wrist, searching for a pulse. He spoke her name. Agnes did not respond. There was no breath he could feel. No movement, no sound. She was declared dead. In medieval Europe, death required speed. Bodies were buried quickly, sometimes within hours, sometimes within a single day. People feared that corpses could spread disease, attract evil spirits, or anger God if left unattended. Cold weather slowed decomposition, but fear accelerated burial. Agnes's body was washed. Her eyes were closed. Her hair was arranged carefully. She was wrapped in a simple burial cloth and placed inside a wooden coffin. The coffin was crude, hastily assembled, and sealed shut. There was no ritual of confirmation, no waiting period, no medical examination beyond what had already been done. She was carried to the churchyard. Snow lightly covered the ground. The air was silent. Her family followed the coffin, exhausted and numb. The priest recited prayers. Earth was thrown down onto the wooden lid. The sound of soil hitting would echoed briefly, then stopped. Agnes was buried. But Agnes was not dead. What likely happened, based on historical medical understanding, was that Agnes had entered a state known today as catalepsy or severe fever-induced paralysis. In such conditions, the body becomes rigid, breathing becomes extremely shallow, and consciousness is suspended. To medieval eyes, this was death. Sometime after the burial, Agnes regained consciousness. Imagine waking in complete darkness, no sound, no air moving, no sense of direction. At first, she may have thought she was dreaming, still ill, still in bed. She tried to move her arms. They struck wood. Her fingers traced rough planks inches from her face. Panic surged through her body as understanding arrived. The smell of earth filled her lungs. The air was stale. The space was impossibly tight. She screamed. No sound escaped. Agnes clawed at the inside of the coffin. Her fingernails scraped wood until they broke. Her hands bled. She kicked, twisted, and thrashed, but the coffin did not move. Above her were layers of frozen soil and snow. No one could hear her. No one was coming. Oxygen was running out. Fear accelerated her breathing. Her heart raced. The little air available disappeared quickly. Eventually, her movements slowed. Her strength failed. Darkness returned. Agnes died alone, underground, in terror. Days later, something unusual happened. Grave robbing was common in medieval Europe. Bodies were buried with rings, cloth, or small valuables. Teeth were sometimes stolen for use in early dentures. One night, a grave robber entered the churchyard and selected Agnes's grave. When he opened the coffin, he recoiled in horror. Agnes's body was no longer lying peacefully. Her position had changed. Her arms were raised. Her fingers were bent and broken. The inside of the coffin was deeply scratched. Her face was frozen in an expression of agony, mouth open, eyes wide. This was not the face of someone who had died quietly. The grave robber fled and reported what he had seen. Authorities and clergy returned to the grave. Witnesses confirmed the condition of the body. There was no doubt among them. Agnes had awakened after burial. This was not an isolated incident. Historical records from medieval Europe describe numerous similar cases. Bodies found turned face down in coffins. Hands torn bloody. Coffin lids scratched from the inside. Medical texts from later centuries reference false death, warning that some conditions could mimic death convincingly. The fear spread. People began to worry constantly about the moment of death. Families hesitated. Some delayed burial despite religious pressure in certain regions. People requested that veins be cut or tongues pierced to ensure death had truly occurred. Others placed small objects in coffins to observe movement. Centuries later, so-called safety coffins would be invented, equipped with bells or tubes to allow the buried to signal for help. These inventions were a direct result of stories like Agnes's. Women were particularly vulnerable. Childbirth complications, severe anemia, fainting disorders, and fever-induced paralysis were common among women and poorly understood. A woman could appear lifeless for hours or days and still recover. Agnes's story was never written as a legend. It appears quietly in burial records and church notes, stripped of drama. But its implications were terrifying. Imagine living in a world where sickness could erase your ability to move or speak, and where silence meant death. Imagine knowing that if your body failed you even briefly, you could be sealed underground forever. This fear became part of medieval consciousness. It shaped rituals. It shaped prayers. It shaped nightmares. Agnes herself was forgotten by history. No monument marks her grave. No portrait preserves her face. Her name survives only as ink on aging parchment. But her suffering changed how people understood death. She reminds us that history is not only about kings, wars, and conquests. It is about ordinary people trapped by ignorance and fear. It is about lives that ended not by fate, but by mistake. Agnes was not killed by plague. She was not killed by violence. She was killed by a world that did not yet understand the fragile boundary between life and death. And beneath the soil of medieval Europe, she was not alone.